Hi everyone! In today's tutorial we are going to make step by step and using EVA foam or foamy Ace Dagger from the anime and manga One Piece. In my case, it's meant to be just for decoration, but I hope you can also use it for your cosplay. Let's jump into the tutorial that I hope you enjoy, find it kind of easy, and I wish you the best of luck if you give it a try. As always, go to the description box if you want to get the patterns that right now you see on the screen. We will start the tutorial with the body of the dagger, so just take a pair of scissors and cut out the outline and set aside the set for now. The base material for our prop will be foam board. I usually use wood for swords, but since this is a small piece, we'll go with something easier to handle and much cheaper. Place the pattern on top of the foam board, trying to save as much material as possible, and then just use a pencil to trace the silhouette. In my case, I modified the pattern to make it easier to attach the card, but you'll find this part of the pattern already adjusted when you download it. Cutting the foam, it's very easy with just a cutter. Just make sure to protect your surface. So now we have the entire piece cut out. Next, you can separate the dagger's handle with just scissors, and we can begin building the volumes entirely using EVA foam of different sizes. We will start with the guard of the dagger. Pay close attention to the pattern, which includes all the details, and as you can see, Ace Dagger guard is thinner than it might seem, since the widest part actually belongs to the set. In the patterns that I provided, you will also find the guard of the dagger. All you have to do is cut out and trace it into a sheet or multiple sheets glued together of EVA foam using a marker. I will be using a 1 cm thick leftover from previous projects, and after cutting it out, you can insert it into the dagger, and in this case you don't need any glue. Next, get the blade section of the pattern and transfer it into a 3 mm thick piece of foam. Trace the silhouette with a marker and cut it out using a cutter. And then just assemble it like if it was a sandwich. What glue do I recommend? Well, many of you already know, but for gluing this material nothing works better than contact cement. The instructions are simple. Work in a well-ventilated area and apply a thin layer of this adhesive to the both surfaces you want to bond. When it's no longer wet to the touch, carefully just align and glue the guides you drew on the EVA foam. And just be careful, because this kind of adhesive doesn't leave room for errors, to be honest. For the handle section, just repeat the same process. In this case, I'm using EVA foam that's 5 mm thick. Glue it using the same method, and once completed, the base volumes are ready, and we can move on to the details. Just return to the patterns and get the detailed part of the handle. Start by cutting out the thicker interior section, and then use a pen to mark this section on the base of the handle, so we know where to apply the glue. Then I cut it out using the same 5 mm thick foam as the handle, and that's it. Once these pieces are cut, we can move to the sidelines, which I just think of details. You could use foam dough for this, but I just decided to keep it simple by cutting them into a 2 mm thick foam. This part of the process, to be honest, it's just a puzzle. Finding pieces, cutting them, placing them in their correct positions. It shouldn't be difficult, but it's a little bit tedious since you'll need to repeat the process on both sides. As you can see, I use a pen to draw the parallel lines of the details before gluing the pieces down and moving on to the next detail. Now, the black circular section I'm working on, it's just a 1 cm thick piece of EVA foam, and I just sanded the edges to make it look like softer. The next step is entirely optional, but I feel like it will improve the final appearance of our piece. I will be using a small rotatory tool equipped with a sanding bit just for wood. I'll gently sand the blade of the dagger to give it like a sharper look, being careful not to damage the foam board. I'll also sand the edges of the handle details to give them more like a rounded feel and a polished appearance. There's one final detail I wanted to add, that are those like 3 ultra thin strips of EVA foam that are attached to the lower part of the handle. I will be also using an old pyrograph tool that I have around to just like make these holes around the black circle. We have finished Ace Dagger, but we still need to do the Seth. So get the pattern and cut it out twice on a 3mm thick foam sheet. After cutting the pieces, I checked that the dagger fits snugly inside. I just grabbed more EVA foam of the same thickness and cut like long strips about 1 to 1.5 centimeters wide. Here's what I did. So I just applied more contact cement to both of the surfaces and I glued the strip on the edge of the set, just following the thinner side, and I continued the same process along the contour until I achieved something similar to what you see. And yes, the dagger fits perfectly inside, so now we can just attach the opposite side. Once that's done, the basic structure of the set is complete. I personally decided to use the rotatory tool again to sand the edges of the set. Again, it's optional, but I like the smooth finish. I leave you with a time-lapse of the Seth detailing process because it's just essentially the same as what we did for the daggers for the handle. All the pieces are cut from EVA foam, different thicknesses, glued with the same adhesive. And you can just find references in the patterns or some photos online. As you can see, I try to reuse as much materials as I can that I just have at home. And for instance, these circular details on the set are just made of googly eyes that I will just paint later. This is not a quick process, so take your time and enjoy. At last, we've finished crafting the dagger and the set, and now it's time for the fun part, that is the painting part. But before painting, we need to prime the surface. As always, I offer you the same options. You can use vinyl latex, but you can also use wood glue. Yes, I know there are many other options, but I just use these ones because they are really cheap and you can find them everywhere. Using a brush, I apply very thin layers of wood glue over the EVA foam, making sure each layer dries completely before adding the other. In total, I think I applied about 3 layers, and that was it. Once it's dry, you'll notice that the surface has like a matte finish, so now we're ready for the painting. Personally, before starting with the colors, I like to add like a second priming layer with spray paint, just to unify the tones and give the final result like more depth. Now we're ready. Put some like newspaper or whatever you have laying around to protect the surface. Grab acrylic paints, low quality brushes, and a clean kitchen sponge. I mixed the paints I had at home to create the tone I felt like for the set, and then, using a clean piece of a kitchen sponge, I began dabbing the paint across the surface. I prefer this technique over a brush because the texture it gives, I don't know, I really like it. The black areas left unpainted add the depth I was talking about on the final look, and I really enjoyed that part. After a couple of layers of paint, I switched to a smaller piece of a sponge, and I'm gonna use brown to paint the details of the straps wrapping around the set. I decided to paint again in black the details like the googly eyes, because I think that the gold paint, if it's metallic, it adheres better on a black dark base. It shows off better. So now that we are done with the Seth painting process, let's move on to the dagger. For the blade, I use like silver metallic effect kind of paint. The dagger guard was painted in brown, and all the decorative details in gold. If you want, you can stop here and everything would be finished. I'm gonna use like a old coarse bristle brush with just like the teeniest amount of black acrylic paint and just add a little bit of depth and like a worn edge kind of effect. But well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, that you can put it into practice, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!